You know, it's so interesting when you're in Congress how people have different perspectives depending on the state and district that they come from and represent. Here you've heard a number of different perspectives. And I guess the way I've looked at this, EPA rulemaking is that it offers states some flexibility to develop a plan that matches the needs and opportunities of its state, considering the kind of industry and the challenges that that state faces. I know in Maryland, we've taken on this challenge of and put forward by our governor to reduce our energy consumption by 15%. Just in a very short time, by 2015. Now, I don't know whether we're going to meet that goal. It's a really big goal, but I think it's important here when we're talking about preserving and protecting the environment, creating jobs for the 21st century, leaving a planet that our children and their grandchildren can enjoy and get the benefit of, that we should set a big goal. It may be at the end of that time we don't meet those goals, but we should try to do that. And so I've looked at this rulemaking as about flexibility. Dr. Cash, I want to ask you about that because in his testimony, Mr. Sopkin mentions that the proposed rule places severe time constraints on states that are potentially insurmountable given the need for state legislation. And I think we all recognize that these kind of things don't happen overnight, especially legislation, but it does appear to me that Massachusetts and other RGGI states have been able to accomplish much of what's described in the building blocks in a relatively short amount of time. So as someone who's been instrumental in developing that legislative basis in Massachusetts that mirrors the intent of the proposed rule, I'm curious about hearing your perspective and what lessons we can learn from the successes that have been achieved by RGGI states in overcoming some of these hurdles.
Thank you very much, Congresswoman Edwards, and it's always been a pleasure to be working with Maryland on RGGI and other projects in this area. First of all, I believe that there will be flexibility even on the legislative versus regulatory side. There were in RGGI, for example, not every state had to pass legislation. There were already states, as Massachusetts was one of them, that had the regulatory authority to become part of the market-based program that is RGGI. The other, I think, thing that's interesting is that during the RGGI process, it was a bipartisan approach. There were, and it changed during there were different gubernatorial elections during the time, but there were both Republican and Democratic governors during that time who saw the economic advantages, and there were legislatures that were interested in moving the ball forward. So while I think that this may be difficult for some states, I think there may be states that have regulatory authority already, and I think in the face of this EPA regulation, I think legislators will see the potential opportunities and build in flexibility in their own state rules, which is another thing that we've done in RGGI. For example, each state can apportion the allowances, the revenue that comes from allowances, in different ways. There isn't a cookie-cutter way to do it. Different states have done different regulations and different laws that allow themselves to comply with what we've agreed upon to be RGGI, but to do it in very different kinds of ways. And so that has been a big advantage, and one I think that adds to the kind of flexibility that we see here in the EPA rule.
Let me just ask about that because, I mean, there's also some criticism, and we've heard it already today, about the job creation potential or the negative impact on jobs. And again, I've always thought of this as, you know, here we are, we're in the early parts of the 21st century. The kind of jobs that we have now are not the kind of jobs that we had in the early part of the 20th century. So the fact that we lose jobs in some areas doesn't close off the opportunity in this new sector, in a growing sector, to create those jobs. Has that been part of your experience as well?
That has been part of our experience, and I just want to say very, very clearly, when any of these changes happen and there are economic shifts, whether they're because of regulation or just the market, the global market changes, it's very, very difficult. And in no way do we minimize the changes that may happen in states that are more dependent on fossil fuels, et cetera. We do not minimize that at all. We have dealt with that in our state. We've had coal plant closings in our state and throughout the region. And we've actually used part of our RGGI funds to assist communities in the transition as those plants have closed down, whether they're in retraining or loss of revenue to the municipality that had the plant as a tax base. So that's something that I think needs to be taken into account.
Thank you.